Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be talking about population growth around the world. My guest is an expert on this topic. John Seager is the president and CEO of Population Connection. He's authored numerous articles and op-eds on population growth. John Seager, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
I'm glad to be with you, Bill, and I see we have something in common, population connection, global connections.
There you go. Everything's connected. The whole world is connected. You've got it. Yeah. Before I forget, let me mention your website is www.populationconnection.org. So I'm sure many of our viewers would like to tap into it and see what else you have on the website that we probably won't get a chance to talk about today. But let's talk about population connection. What is your mission? What do you do? Why do you do it?
Well, we want a better, safer, less crowded world. We believe, as our mission statement states, that overpopulation threatens the quality of life for people everywhere, not just people, all of nature, and we depend on nature. We wouldn't survive a minute in this world without nature. So it's important to our lives. It was around before we were around. It'll be around after we're around, and we need to be good stewards of nature, and we need to treat each other better too. And what we're all about is educating the next generation so that they can think for themselves about population challenges and about removing all the barriers that prevent women around the world from making their own decisions about the very private and personal matter of when, whether to have children.
That is extremely, extremely important. And it's one that I would bet that most of the women around the world, there are about 8.2 billion people on the planet right now, and the majority are probably women.
Yeah, as best we can tell. And I will say that the population debate has been going on for a bit over 2 centuries. Goes back to a fellow named Malthus, who was an Anglican cleric who wrote a famous book on the subject. And there were people back then who disagreed with him, who thought that population growth was not a problem. The debate has gone on for several hundred years. Too often, it has been a debate among men deciding what's best for women. And we need to stop that. And we need to recognize that from an ethical standpoint and a practical standpoint, and the first one's enough for me, but it's nice that the second one comes into play. We need to remove all those barriers. We need to enable women to have the education, the access to services, and to be able to live in a culture that respects their decisions. The interesting thing about that, Bill, is that when that happens, most women choose smaller families. And it really is the key to addressing the population challenge.
It certainly is. Studies have shown that for years now. Well, you have a variety of programs in the United States and really worldwide. You have a variety of partners around the world. What are a couple of the programs that you're operating, either in the United States, in the U.S. and around the world?
Well, we focus on 2 primary areas, and then we've added a third in recent years. I think it's important for any organization not to try to do everything. There are absolutely wonderful organizations out there that are working to preserve local streams and parks and open space, and others that are working on dealing with the toxic pollution problem. We focus on population. And what we do about it first is we have the best and only nationwide population education program. We train about 10,000 teachers a year. We have about 50,000 teachers across the country who use our materials in classrooms, mostly in public schools in every state. And we reach about 3 million students a year through that program. Our goal is not to tell young people what to think about population, but rather to get them to think, to inspire them through hands-on activities and readings and workshops to consider the implications of population growth and all the challenges that come along with it. And also the implications of population decline, because that is now becoming a reality in many places. And so we can't ignore that as a challenge. The second thing we do is what I mentioned earlier, is we advocate fiercely to remove those barriers that prevent women from making their own decisions and to support the programs that provide financial investments in those programs. The final new thing we're doing, we now have about 20 global partners around the world, everywhere from Guatemala to Nepal. These are smaller organizations that work on the ground in communities around issues of population health and the environment. And we can look at this from 30,000 feet, but ultimately it comes down to what happens in communities, in villages, among people. And so we're now supporting those programs as well.
You mentioned about your partners, and one of your partners, I'm assuming, is the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, which has remarkable programs and outreach around the world with their volunteers and what have you. Even, well, I don't know now with the cutbacks the U.S. has made, but how do you work with the Population Fund at the United Nations?
Well, of course, the thing to remember about the United Nations is that it is an aggregation of some 200 nations on Earth, and you put pretty much every nation on Earth in the same place, you're going to find a lot of discord, disagreements, different perspectives. We are different, and we're governed differently in many different ways. The UN has a long and strong track record of providing support to important programs around the world. There's kind of a piece to it that is, I guess you'd call it interesting. It's a little annoying sometimes. There is a UN environmental program, a UNEP, and then there's the UNFPA. The UN environmental program has become the strong advocate for addressing population, while the UNFPA in recent years doesn't really want to talk about population. It's a kind of a strange situation. This is not to in any way criticize the on-the-ground programs, but for some reason they have decided that you shouldn't talk about population. And one of the really interesting things, Bill, is that when you talk to experts in sub-Saharan Africa, they are very concerned about population growth. That's where the most rapid population growth is occurring on Earth. And one of the frustrations that sub-Saharan Africa has is that the countries in the global north don't really want to talk about population anymore. And that, to me, is sadly all too typical of the way the global north has dealt with the global south. We tend to put our point of view as being the one that matters and not really listening to the people who are facing the biggest challenges sometimes.
Right. You do have a diversity of opinions at the UN. There are 193 countries that make up the UN General Assembly, and you've got everything I guess you could say from the far left to the far right as far as philosophies in that discussion. So you do have that to contend with, no doubt about it.
You do. And one of the other challenges is that, and we'll be getting to this, but I'll sort of jump into this. The Trump administration has taken a chainsaw they've done to family planning what they did to the East Wing of the White House. They've just demolished it. And they did it pretty much in the same way without really any notice. They just went out and literally shut down USAID and demolished the programs. And the impact of that is really extraordinary. This is going to mean, because of that, more than 17 million unintended pregnancies will occur in a single year because of that action. You're going to have, guess what? You're going to have 5 million more unsafe abortions. It's striking. You would think the people who, we're very pro-choice, but there are other people in this country who are not. You would think that they would be the loudest voice on behalf of family planning programs. Because the only thing you do when you cut those programs is you don't reduce abortion, you actually increase it and make it unsafe. And it's a very strange situation. And unfortunately, the United States, which has been the global leader for really as long as these programs have been around, is now off the playing field. And that makes an enormous difference when your biggest player leaves the field. I don't care whether it's in sports, your best player, or in international investment. It makes a big difference because your leader isn't there anymore. And other countries are also starting to cut back, including the UK. So we're facing a very difficult situation right now, and it comes down to politics.
It certainly does. And we're going to come back in just a minute and talk about that. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, and you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues. Today we're talking about population growth or decline, whichever the case might be, in the United States and around the world. My guest is an expert on this topic. Mr. John Seager is the president and CEO of Population Connection. John, you were talking about the United States and its leadership role. Through the destruction of the AID programs, our soft power programs, that we had some really outstanding soft power programs, we've really relegated our leadership in many areas of the world. And as you said, there's a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum, somebody will fill it. And in most cases, right now at the UN, it's China. How is that? This is so detrimental to the United States, is it not? And to the world, not just to the US.
Absolutely. You are quite correct in using the phrase soft power. That is the term of art. I don't know where it originated. If I'd been in that room, I might have suggested a slightly different phraseology because it is anything but soft. When you walk into, when you provide resources that are saving lives, when you provide resources that are freeing people from the tyranny of extreme poverty and disease, that's about as strong and tough and hard as I can think of. And the people who do that work have to endure some tremendous obstacles and even dangers. And so, we have been the leader for as long as these programs have gone around. And it was a bipartisan effort for generations. I wasn't Richard Nixon's biggest fan by any means, but Richard Nixon strongly supported these programs. Jerry Ford strongly supported these programs. The domestic family planning programs were initially championed by a young congressman named George H.W. Bush, who took the lead on that. I wish we were back in an era where both political parties were competing with each other to see how much they could do to support these vital programs. Unfortunately, we live in a very, very partisan moment. I hope the moment will pass, but we have to deal with the way things are today and not the way we wish they were.
Mm-hmm. No, in those days, you had a competition of ideas and philosophies. Today, it's a competition of rhetoric. It doesn't matter. The facts don't matter. We don't worry about the facts. Throw them into the ditch, so to speak. Unfortunately, that's where we are today. You were talking about how this is not a partisan issue. In the United States, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, I'm going to guess all of them use to some degree, form of family planning. They all are espousing what you're espousing, but it's become so politicized. And one place we see it in some of the states, we have what we call the red states, the blue states, red states, Republican, blue states, Democratic. How are your materials received, your educational materials, say in a red state like Arkansas or Oklahoma or Kentucky or wherever it might be?
Well, we were able to operate successfully in red states, blue states, purple states. I don't know if there are any yellow or orange states, but if there were, we could operate in them as well.
They're purple.
I guess they are. What we do is we very carefully, using a third-party entity, make sure that the materials we use in any state, whether it's Maine or Mississippi or Missouri, fit within the state educational guidelines. Again, we are not trying to get materials into classrooms that push a message. We are trying to educate. We are trying to expose young people to ideas and to get them to look at the facts and make their own conclusions. And so if, say, a elementary school teacher in Alabama were to be, say, somebody would say, well, what about this thing you did in the classroom? She can say, well, look, here are the Alabama state standards. This particular item fits within the standard. If go talk to them. If they tell me I can't do something, then I can't do it. But we do not have a problem with that because we don't try to work outside the structure of states. One of the interesting things, Bill, is our programs, all things considered, are probably stronger in red states than blue states because teachers in red states often really welcome the opportunity to have access to materials that they might not otherwise have. There's a saying out in Berkeley, California, that every auto body shop has its own foreign policy out there. So in the more blue areas, I think students tend to be more exposed to global ideas, whereas in the red states, there are more opportunities for us.
That is an opportunity, no doubt about it. And it's good that they're open-minded and receptive to your educational materials. It's very important. Well, as you look around the world today, and it's a confused world, what do you see as far, how do you view the lay of the land as far as population development, some of the major obstacles that you're going to be facing in the future? And then we'll get around to what can we do in the future. But let's just talk about some of the challenges.
Sure. I would offer the notion that if you thought of the 5 or 6 most impactful technological innovations ever. I guess I don't know if figuring out how to start fires is one of them, but certainly the printing press is right in there. The harnessing of electricity is right in there. I would submit to you that modern contraception has got to be somewhere on that list of 5 or 6, because for the first time, half of the world, women, have the ability to control, or have the potential ability to control, the trajectory of their lives. And we've seen that as being truly transformative. When I was born way back in 1950, maybe it was 18, no, it was 1950, that's right. In 1950, the average woman in the world had about 5 children. Today, that's down to between 2.2 and 2.3. So this has been a true revolution, but it's been an uneven revolution. Most of sub-Saharan Africa still has very large families with lack of access to services and extreme poverty. And certainly there are pockets elsewhere. But the fact is that we know what works now. It's just a question of not letting up at a point where we could achieve so much. And also now starting to recognize that as welcome as we think as we consider population decline to be potentially, it carries with it its own challenges, and we can't ignore those.
What do you think would be the biggest of if there's a decline in population?
Well, in my view, it isn't what people think it might be. Goldman Sachs came up with a fascinating study recently, and incidentally, I don't consider Goldman Sachs a natural ally of ours. They're there to help people make money. That's their goal, and that's that. They did an analysis of the cost in the United States of an aging population, which is not inconsiderable. But then they came across a fascinating fact that canceled that out. Americans are working longer. And when you factor that in, it cancels out those costs. And one of the reasons Americans are working longer is because more and more of us are now in information fields. If you work, I spent a few years as a carpenter. You spend 35, 40 years swinging a hammer, you're pretty well worn out at that point. But when you work in an information field, the longer you work, the better off your brain is. And you haven't, taxed your body overly. Sometimes we should tax it a bit more, maybe. So the point is, that's not the issue. I think the key issue, Bill, is that there are communities that are losing population. And that's happening often for reasons that have not much to do with fertility itself, but just transformations. You have rural communities that are losing jobs, they're losing hospitals, they're losing schools. And we need to step up and address the cost of population decline the same way we address the costs of population growth, by investing in those communities. If we don't, they are ripe for exploitation by people who will find somebody else to blame for their problems.
And that ties right into our healthcare crisis in this country right now. And we see recently Congress, or the Republican Congress, I should say, passed this horrific bill that's going to close hundreds of hospitals in rural areas around the country. And a large number, the majority, as I understand it, I've been reading, are in red states. So they're going to suffer the most. But there are so many negative implications of this. And that's why we all have to be hands-on and get involved in this. And what do you, in our last couple of minutes, what do you recommend to our viewers? And if you were talking to the president or the Secretary General of the UN, what would you recommend to them to do to try to alleviate this problem and to inform the public? That is so critical. We need solid, objective information.
I would suggest that that we could all do more listening across the board. You know, we commissioned an interesting survey several years ago. Our mission statement, as I said at the outset, starts with the words overpopulation threatens the quality of life for people everywhere. Well, we conducted 2 surveys. We asked young progressive activists what they thought about that. And we didn't do this ourselves. We hired somebody who knows how to do this stuff. And we also asked environmentalists. More than 80% agreed with us. I think if people stop sort of getting hung up with all the filters out there, with all the people who are telling them what other people are thinking, and bypass that and go out there, you'll find that most people want families to be able to make their own private personal decisions. Most of us like that. I mean, there's almost no principle that goes back farther in law than the idea that a person's home is their castle. We need to respect people's rights to make their own decisions. And that's the key here. And I think that while I'm on one side of the fence politically, I think people on both sides of the fence could do a better job of listening to what people actually want and trying to figure out how to provide it, and not spend quite so much time listening to the loudest voice in the room, whoever that might be.
Who may not have the right information on top of it. That's the problem.
And I will just close by saying, we try to provide good information on our website. We publish a quarterly magazine, which people can join and get a paper copy, but they can get it online at no cost. There's plenty of information out there. And I would also note that we try to be very available. I'm john@popconnect.org. John@popconnect.org. People are welcome to contact me, and I'll do my best to get back to them with any question they have, even if they disagree with me. I enjoy that.
There you go. It's an open door policy. Very true. And our viewers can go to your website at populationconnection.org to get more information and also to become a member. And as I recall, you're a 501c3. Is that correct?
We are. We have another organization that is separately funded that does political work, but on Population Connection is a 501c3. Contributions are tax deductible, and we conduct ourselves accordingly. So we welcome people's interest. We welcome their support. And we even enjoy it when people bring their own point of view to us, and we have to sort it out. So the door's open.
Very good. That's the best way to be. Well, John Seager, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program, and keep up the great work you're doing on this important topic.
Thank you, Bill, and have a fine holiday season and beyond.
And thank you. Same to you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.